Conrad Vale was used to power, billionaire, developer, unstoppable, until he stepped off the elevator one morning and found a little girl asleep outside his office. Her backpack was her pillow. Her note, taped to the glass, read, "Please don't call security. I just wanted to ask if you ever mean it when you say you help people." What followed wasn't a news headline. It was a movement. One child, one question. And the moment a man with everything was brought to his knees by 6 words that would change everything. The hallway was silent at that hour, top floor just before sunrise. The rest of the building was dark, resting between power and motion, the city below flickering like it hadn't made up its mind about morning yet. Conrad Vale stepped out of the elevator, coffee in one hand, briefcase in the other, and stopped. There, curled against the wall beside the glass doors to his office, was a girl. Small, asleep, a backpack under her head, one sneaker untied, the edge of her coat tucked awkwardly beneath her. He blinked, took a slow step forward. Taped to the glass, just above her, was a note, handwritten in thick black marker on a page torn from a spiral notebook. It read, "Please don't call security. I just wanted to ask if you ever mean it when you say you help people." He stared at it, then at her. She couldn't have been more than 10, maybe 11. Her cheeks were smudged with sleep. She had a Band-Aid on one finger and a faded patch on the sleeve of her jacket. Conrad lowered his briefcase, knelt. She stirred at the sound of his keys, opened her eyes slowly, didn't flinch. "You're Mr. Vale," she said quietly. "I am," he replied. "And are not supposed to be here." "I know." He looked at the note again. "Did you write this?" She sat up, brushing hair from her face. "Yes?" "You could have sent a letter. I didn't think you'd read it." He hesitated. "Fair. What's your name?" "Sam." "Why are you here, Sam?" She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded envelope. Inside were 5 sheets of paper. The first was a photo, her with her mom and a dog on a porch. The second, an eviction notice. The third, a school report card with the corner torn. The fourth, a drawing of a house with one light still on. And the last, a list. Things I'm trying to hold on to. My house, my school. My dog, he's with someone else now. The feeling that I'm not invisible. My mom's smile when she isn't tired. Conrad read it twice. The hallway felt too big now, too cold. Sam watched him carefully. "I didn't want to be on the news or anything," she said. "I just thought, if I could get to where you are, maybe you'd tell me if people like us are already decided for." He stared at the last page, the list, the handwriting uneven but steady. He looked up and said, without meaning to, "You're not invisible." Her lip trembled, but she nodded. "Then I'm not sorry I came." Conrad stood and unlocked the office door. "Come inside," he said. Sam hesitated, then gathered her backpack, stood slowly, and followed. The lights blinked on as the glass doors closed behind them. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened to the city's edge, where the sky was beginning to warm. Everything inside was sleek, controlled, expensive, designed to impress people with power. But Sam didn't look impressed. She looked tired. He gestured toward the long conference table. "Sit," she did. He walked to the coffee machine, poured her a cup of water, and slid it across the table. She didn't touch it. He sat across from her. "Why this building?" he asked. "You're in the news a lot," she said. "You talk about helping, building things, changing the city." "I do." She looked him straight in the eye. "You bought our building 6 months ago. Everything changed after that." What was the address? 126 Farwell Street, Unit 3B. He knew it, not because it stood out, but because it didn't. One of hundreds swept into a redevelopment plan, a block of digits in a folder passed across a polished desk. Sam dug into her backpack again. This time she pulled out a second note. This one was newer, carefully written on lined paper. She placed it in front of him. He read, If I already lost everything, is there any point in trying to talk to people like you?" He looked at her, really looked, and said, "Yes, especially then." Sam's voice dropped to a whisper. "You sure?" "I wasn't," he said. "Not before this morning, but now?" "Yes." She didn't cry, but she looked like someone who might finally let herself sleep again. Conrad leaned back. The sun crept higher behind him. "I'm going to call my team," he said. "We're going to review everything. If I can stop what's happening at your building, I will. If not, I'll find another way." Sam nodded slowly, then reached into her backpack one last time. She pulled out a crumpled drawing and unfolded it. It showed a building with a single light still on, a girl sitting on the front steps. Beneath it, 6 words. "I was still in there, waiting." He took it gently, held it in both hands, and whispered, "Not anymore." The drawing stayed on his desk from that day forward, pinned just below his mission statement, a mission he rewrote the same afternoon, starting with a new first line: "If someone shows up to be seen, drop everything." Conrad didn't wait to act. By midday, he had canceled 3 meetings and summoned his housing division to the top floor. No prep, no slide decks, just the drawing. He pinned it to the glass wall behind him, the one with the skyline view, and let it speak first. "This," he said, pointing to the paper with its creased edges and 6 quiet words, "is now the most important document in this building." His staff exchanged confused glances. He told them about Sam, told them about the hallway, the note, the list of 5 things she was trying to hold on to. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room listened. "I want everything related to Farwell Street in front of me today," he said, "and not just that building. I want every project that puts children on steps with backpacks they use as pillows." The director of acquisitions cleared his throat. "With respect, Conrad, this will cost us." Conrad nodded. "It already has." He turned back to the drawing. "I told her she wasn't invisible. I meant it. So now we make sure our work does too." That night Sam returned home, or what was left of it. Her mom stood in the kitchen with a stack of envelopes, bills, notices, warnings. Sam handed her the drawing Conrad had kept a copy of. "He saw it," she said. Her mother looked at her, tired but alert. "And? I think he stayed." 3 days later, Sam's building received a letter, official but handwritten, from Conrad himself. Inside, a promise of protection, rental stability, maintenance funding, a community liaison assigned to every unit, a name and number, not for a helpline, but a person. The letter ended with, "Your home is not a spreadsheet. We forgot that. We won't again." It was pinned to the building's front door for all to read. Beside it, someone taped a new drawing. A girl on the steps, smiling, and below it, scrawled in marker, "Someone saw me. That changed everything." And from that day on, Conrad's lobby, once adorned with awards and framed contracts, featured only one centerpiece: a wall of drawings, folded, crumpled, bright, faded, each one telling the story of what happens when a child doesn't wait to be invited, and a grown-up finally listens. Years later, the story of the girl on the steps became more than memory. It became policy. It became a pivot point, cited in housing reform articles, echoed in TED Talks, told in boardrooms and elementary schools alike. But Conrad didn't frame it as legacy. He framed it as accountability. Every new employee at Vale Equity received a welcome packet. At the top was a copy of Sam's drawing, not a scanned version, a printed, slightly imperfect copy, the way she had handed it to him, creased and smudged and real. Beside it, a sentence printed in bold: "You work where children sleep." Conrad never trademarked the phrase, and he didn't need to. It caught on anyway. By the time Sam turned 16, the company had launched an entire department called HOLD, Housing Outreach and Listening Division, staffed entirely by former tenants, educators, advocates, and youth with lived experience. Sam was invited to intern. She accepted, but only under one condition. She wouldn't sit behind a desk. She'd work in the field. On her first day, she brought a stack of notebooks. She handed them to kids waiting outside community centers, school lobbies, and corner stores. On the inside cover, she wrote the same line in each. "You don't need to speak loudly. You just need to be heard." One child, after filling 10 pages with drawings, handed her back a folded sheet and whispered, "I didn't know grown-ups read these." Sam looked him in the eye and said, "The ones who matter do." He smiled and added a final sentence to his page. "Maybe one day I will too." She pinned it to her wall at home, right beside her own childhood list. The things she had tried to hold on to: her house, her school, her dog, her mom's smile, and now a new one: the feeling that I wasn't invisible. Not only had she held on, she had handed it forward. And Conrad? He never forgot the morning he found her outside his office. He spoke of it only once, late in his life, at a small event attended by students and teachers. He held up the drawing again, fragile now, the lines barely visible. "This changed more than me," he said. "It rewrote the question of what we're building. It made sure we never answered with silence again." And then he said her name, not to give her credit, but to remind everyone who truly started the story. A girl with a backpack, a note taped to glass, and a question no one had dared ask him before. "Do you ever mean it when you say you help people?" Now the walls of every office bearing his name echoed with only one response: "Yes, we do, now." And still the drawing hung, in the lobby of the tallest building his company ever renovated, not the biggest, but the one most people walked through: families, caseworkers, teenagers in hoodies, parents with strollers, kids carrying notebooks. Every single one passed under it. Framed in reclaimed wood, lit by the morning sun, it remained unchanged. The girl, the steps, the light in the window, and 6 words. I was still in there, waiting. People didn't stop to read the plaque beneath it anymore. They knew. They felt it. One day, a girl not much younger than Sam sat beneath the frame while her mom filled out housing forms. She looked up at the drawing, traced it with her eyes, and then turned to the receptionist. "Did that really happen?" The receptionist smiled. "Yes." "Did he really stop everything because of a kid?" "Yes," she said. And then he built better, with her. The girl was quiet a moment, then pulled a crumpled paper from her backpack. It had her name on it, her school, a list of things she wanted to keep, and a drawing of a door with a light under it. She handed it to the receptionist. "Will someone read this?" The receptionist nodded. "Every time." The girl smiled and wrote one last line on the back before she walked away. "I'm not waiting outside anymore." They pinned it beside the frame. No glass, no tape, just thumbtacks. And it stayed there, just like the others. Proof that sometimes the right person doesn't need a title, just a reason, just a voice, just a piece of paper, with something worth staying for. Years passed. Buildings changed. Names shifted. But that note, the one Sam left taped to the glass, remained the first artifact in every exhibit built in every city that followed. It was never translated, though visitors from all over the world came to see it. It didn't need translation. Its ache spoke fluently. "Please don't call security. I just wanted to ask if you ever mean it when you say you help people." It was printed on the back of all volunteer training cards, etched above the doors of youth housing offices, used in classrooms as the first prompt in empathy units. Still, the most powerful place it ever lived was in the mouth of a boy who came decades later. Not Sam's son, but a child who had heard her story, heard how she'd once laid her body across concrete to be near hope. He walked into a developer's office holding nothing but a list. He was small, quiet, his shoes too big, his backpack too full. When the man behind the desk asked what he was doing there, the boy said softly, "I'm trying it." What she did, the note. The man blinked. "What note?" And the boy repeated word for word, "Please don't call security. I just want to ask if you mean it when you say you help people." And that was it. That was the whole story all over again. That was the reminder. That was the door. Still open. Still waiting for someone to stand up or sit down and say, "Yes, I mean it now." And because of that boy, the note lived again, not just on glass or in frames, but in breath. A school in Detroit began every Monday by reading it aloud. A muralist in Manila painted it across a wall wrapped in vines and sky. A youth counselor in Dublin handed it to each teen she met, not as a threat or warning, but as an invitation. "Here, this was brave once. You can be too." It even reached places the original never could. Inside courtrooms, inside shelters, inside boardrooms, where a child's voice, once ignored, now echoed in policy. One day, a young woman named Mila walked into the Tri-Archive. She held no paper, no backpack, just a memory. "I was her," she told the docent. "Her?" the woman asked gently. Mila nodded. "I was the one they almost didn't hear, but someone showed them the note." She walked to the glass frame, read it again, as if for the first time, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small sticker. It had 6 words printed in silver on deep blue. She stuck it on the wall beside the frame. It read, "I'm here because the door opened." She didn't wait for thanks. She didn't need to. She just left the door a little wider. So the next child wouldn't have to tape a note to be believed. They'd only have to walk in, carrying truth, and be met with the words that finally meant something. "Yes, we do help people." Starting now. And still the hallway remembered her. Every sunrise that spilled across the polished floors, every child who hesitated just beyond the doorway, every breath held in the moment before someone asked if they mattered. The hallway remembered Sam. The patch on her sleeve, the sleep in her eyes, the courage it took to fold a note instead of folding herself. Somewhere a new child did the same. In a different city, a different building, a different pair of shoes with scuffed toes. He wrote a note too, crayon on notebook paper. He taped it to a door and waited. It read, "If you help people, I'm one." Inside the building, a woman in a suit found it first. She stood reading it for a long time, then peeled the tape gently from the glass and carried it to the director. The director read it once, twice, then stood and walked outside. The boy was still there, back straight, backpack hugged tight, eyes wide with the kind of hope that could break if ignored too long. The director knelt, just like Conrad once had, and said, "I read your note." The boy nodded. "And?" The director smiled. "We're here for you now." The boy exhaled, then reached into his pocket and handed her something else, a folded list. At the top, "Things I hope don't get taken." The director didn't read it right away. She simply said, "Let's go talk about them inside." And together they walked through the doors, the note still warm in her hand, and into a future built one folded page at a time. Still beginning. The boy's list was short, only 3 things. Our window, my little sister's blanket, the spot in the hallway where the light hits just right in the morning. The director read it later that night, sitting at her desk with the list spread flat before her like a map. Not of loss, but of what was left, what he still clung to. She didn't add notes in the margin. She didn't pass it to legal. She made copies, one for her, one for the staff, one to keep posted beside the front door, so anyone entering would see what mattered. Over time, the spot where the boy stood became something more. Others came. Other notes were taped to the door, then the wall beside it, then onto a bulletin board placed there intentionally. They called it the first ask. Each paper added not to demand, but to begin. A girl once left this, "We live on the 3rd floor. I'm not asking you to fix it, just to notice we're still here." A maintenance worker wrote beneath it, "I see you. I'm staying." It kept going, not one note ever taken down, only circled, only continued, until the entire wall was covered in beginnings. Not of stories finished, but of doors gently, courageously opened. And one day, when that same boy walked past as a teenager, taller now, more quiet than ever, he stopped, looked at his own note, still taped to the top corner. He didn't take it down. He just added to it, in the corner, in pen, "Thank you for saying yes." And beneath that, it saved more than just the window. The building eventually became known as the place with the wall, not officially, not on maps, but in the mouths of kids, families, neighbors. It was how people gave directions. "Oh, you're looking for the housing office? It's the one with the wall." That wall, once small and taped with a single note, had grown. Notes layered, pages curled, corners soft from hands brushing against them every day. Some were new. Some had been there for years, but none were removed. They yellowed with time, but stayed. Each one a moment someone had once dared to ask, to hope, to be visible. Eventually, a girl named Aya walked by every day after school. She never stopped, just looked. One day she brought her own note. She didn't tape it to the wall. She sat on the bench across from it and held the note in her hands for a long time. Then, finally, gently, she walked over and tucked it behind another, a small space left open between two crinkled pages. No one noticed at first, but later a volunteer saw it and read the quiet pencil words. "I didn't think I had anything new to say, but I read your notes, and now I don't feel behind." They pinned it in the center, gave it room, wrote beneath it in marker, "This note arrived right on time." And from that day on, a new tradition began, not of adding more space, but of reading what was already there, and realizing that every word, every folded corner, every quiet line was not the beginning of one story, but the continuation of all of them. Still taped, still trembling, still here. On the first rainy morning of spring, a boy named Eli came to the wall with no note at all, just a pencil. He stood for a long time, reading what others had written, pages softened by rain, sun, fingers. Some had drawings, some were lists, some were just one sentence long. He finally found a gap, small, uneven, between two notes that had curled back just enough. And there, on the exposed concrete, he wrote, "I didn't bring anything, but I stopped walking." He didn't wait. He didn't ask. He just left the pencil resting on the ledge. Later that day, a younger girl traced his words with her fingertip. Then she added a reply, scribbled in crayon on the back of a math worksheet. "Stopping is something. It means you saw us." They pinned her note under his. No framing, no ceremony, just quiet. By evening, 6 more children had added replies, not in a line, but in a spiral around his words, like the beginning of something taking root. A question, a pause, a first breath, one that didn't need to be loud to be heard, just real, just enough. And by morning, the spiral had grown. The volunteers didn't interfere. They simply cleared a little more wall, dusted the lower ledge, and left a box of pencils beside a sign that now read, "You don't have to start loud, you just have to start." The spiral curved inward like a shell, like a path. Some wrote words, some just left marks, an X, a star, a wobbly heart. One child added a faint drawing of 2 hands almost touching. Another wrote beneath it, "Mine is still reaching." By the end of the week, the wall felt like it breathed, not because of what was added, but because of how gently it was held. Eli came back. He stood in front of his sentence, now surrounded by responses. He didn't speak, but he smiled, then leaned in and wrote one more line, smaller this time, tucked just below the original. "Thank you for noticing I paused." A little girl, too short to reach, asked a passerby to lift her up, so she could leave her reply. She scrawled, "We were already waiting." And the wall, as always, held it all. Every sentence, every stillness, every small hand that reached forward with nothing but a pause, and the hope that someone would stay long enough to see it. By the end of that month, the wall wasn't just something people passed. It was something they approached, slowly, intentionally. New visitors were often quiet at first, reading the spiral like a story they were still learning how to enter. Teachers brought students. Caseworkers brought teens. Once a grandfather brought his grandson and said only, "This is what listening looks like." The spiral wrapped wider now, reaching toward the ceiling. Someone added a ladder below it, not real, just drawn in soft pencil, rung by rung. Beside it they wrote, "For the ones who need help climbing into their voice." And children did. One girl stood on tiptoes, added a single sentence at the highest point she could reach. "I thought I had to wait for better words, but these were ready." A boy traced one of the rungs and whispered to no one, "I think this is where I start." Every day the wall grew. Every day the space around it deepened, not in volume, but in meaning. Because what began with a single note from a child trying to be seen had become a living archive of courage. Not polished, not perfect, but true. A slow, beautiful uprising of voices that dared to speak, even if all they had to say was, "I'm here." And that, as always, was more than enough. And one day someone asked, "How will we know when the wall is finished?" The question came from a child, curious, not impatient. A volunteer, older now, with lines around her eyes from years of witnessing quiet bravery, smiled. She didn't answer right away. She walked to the wall, ran her hand along the latest note, one written in large, looping letters by a child still learning how to spell. "I didn't think I could be part of this until I saw someone else try first." She turned back to the child and said, "We'll know it's finished when no one else needs to ask if they belong here." The child nodded slowly, then reached for a pencil. She didn't ask for space. She didn't ask for permission. She simply drew a small open circle at the base of the spiral and wrote beneath it, "This is the door I walked in through." The next day someone added footsteps. The day after, a name, then another and another, until the base of the wall was filled with signs of arrival, of staying, of starting again. And in the center of that circle, where so many had paused, a new sign appeared. No one knew who wrote it. Not the end, just enough for today. And that somehow was the most complete sentence on the wall. The wall stayed soft, even as it grew taller, even as it curved into the ceiling, even as time folded more years into its paper skin. Nothing about it hardened. It held fingerprints and smudges, tears that had dried into the ink, corners bent by wind or the careful folding of small, uncertain hands. People kept coming, not for closure, for beginning. One evening, long after closing hours, a janitor who had worked in the building for nearly 2 decades stood in front of the wall. He had never written on it, never spoken of it, only swept beneath it, made sure no drawings slipped from their pins, that no words got caught under the radiator. But that night he pulled a folded page from his pocket, yellowed, creased. He pinned it to the lowest corner of the spiral where children often sat, cross-legged to read. On it, just this: "I was here every day. I didn't leave a sentence. But I watched every one of yours arrive." The next morning, someone circled it, wrote underneath, "Then your sentence was the room." No one took it down, and no one wrote anything else that day. It didn't need more. Because some walls are never finished by writing, only by staying. And the wall stayed, season after season, pencil after pencil, voice after voice. It became less a surface and more a rhythm, an inheritance passed without ceremony from one uncertain hand to the next. Children began bringing their friends not just to see the wall, but to add to it, not to perform, to join. A little boy once wrote in shaky block letters, "I came because my friend said I could." Beneath it, that friend added, "I said he didn't have to write anything, but then he did." They laughed when they saw their words together. They didn't pose for photos. They just stood a little taller. On the other side of the room, a teenager, tall, quiet, rarely there more than a few minutes, left behind a drawing. It wasn't neat. It wasn't labeled. Just two chairs side by side, one turned slightly toward the other. And underneath, "You don't have to talk first, you just have to sit." The drawing was left unpinned. People stepped around it for days, until someone gently taped it to the center of the wall, just above the janitor's note. No title, no explanation. But those who stood in front of it afterward, children, teachers, parents, strangers, they didn't speak. They just sat. And the wall, as ever, made room, not for perfection, only for arrival, only for again. And one quiet morning, long before the building opened, a child arrived early. Too early. She waited outside the doors, clutching a folded napkin in both hands, the only paper she had found that day. A volunteer noticed her, unlocked the door early, and walked her in. "You came to see the wall?" the volunteer asked. The girl nodded. "I have something, but it's small." That's exactly what this wall was made for. She walked across the room with slow, careful steps, unfolded the napkin. It had no drawing, no message, just one word, written carefully in green marker. Again. She pinned it near the top of the spiral, as high as she could reach. When she stepped back, the room seemed to still around her. The spiral, which had started so long ago with a question and a chair and a child trying not to disappear, now ended, at least for the day, with a word that said everything. Try again, hope again, begin again. And though the wall would grow tomorrow, with new questions, new hands, new names, that morning it simply held one answer, one word, one offering. Again. And as always, it was enough. That word stayed at the top of the spiral. Visitors pointed it out softly, reverently. Children traced the curve of the letters. Elders nodded when they saw it, because they remembered what it took to get to again. Over time, it became a quiet ritual. Each new note added to the wall was read aloud by someone in the room, not like a ceremony, more like breathing, a recognition, a pause. One day, a new child entered with a folded page, blank except for one phrase written upside down at the very bottom. "I'm not ready to speak, but I want to be here when someone else is." She placed it gently at the foot of the wall, then sat beside it, didn't leave, didn't speak, just waited. Hours later, another child arrived. Read the note, sat beside her, didn't speak either. The volunteer on duty noticed, wrote a note of their own, pinned it above them. Silence is a kind of yes. That evening, someone added another. So is staying. And the next day, the napkin was still there, again still watching from above. And the room, holding, listening, steady, remained the kind of place where nothing had to be loud, to be real. Only brave, only true, only shared, again. And so the wall breathed again. It had no end, no final word, only continuations, fragments, pauses, footsteps, fingerprints. It welcomed notes tucked into cracks, pencil marks added between the lines, and names scrawled sideways in corners because that's where someone felt safest. The spiral no longer needed direction. It moved like a living thing, shaped by every hand that approached it with the question, "Do I belong here?" And the wall always answered, without sound, without ceremony. Yes, even now, especially now. A new edition appeared one rainy evening, written in faint blue pen on the back of a bus transfer slip. I didn't think anyone remembered what I was trying to say, but then I saw the wall. It was taped next to a wrinkled drawing of two figures holding an umbrella. No faces, just outlines. standing in the same silence. Below that, a child had written, "You don't have to remember what you said. We're still answering it." And that night, just before the lights dimmed, a volunteer passed by and whispered what had become the room's quiet promise. "Try again tomorrow. The wall will be here." And it was. And the next day, someone did, and a child, new, quiet, stepped through the door just after opening. She carried a lunchbox in one hand, a folded napkin in the other. On it, in careful pencil, "I was told not to take up space, but this felt like mine." She didn't pin it to the wall. She placed it on the bench beneath it and sat beside it. No one asked her to explain. No one moved the napkin. They just sat too, one by one, until the bench filled with others who had once been told the same thing. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. Someone eventually wrote on a slip of paper and laid it beside the napkin. "You took space. We made more." Later, a drawing appeared at the base of the wall, a cluster of chairs, none the same, none in rows. Some faced out, some leaned in, some were empty. Above them, written in marker, "Everyone came from a different direction, but we stayed." That drawing was left untouched. It stayed at the bottom, where new eyes always begin, and every visitor who saw it whispered the same thing, even if only in their heart. "Again, me too, I'm still here." And the wall listened. To every whisper, every silence, every scribbled fragment passed from one hand to another. Over time, it became more than memory. It became momentum. Visitors no longer asked where to place their notes. They asked, where would it feel right? And always the answer came gently, just a glance upward, or a hand to the heart, or a quiet step toward a space that had been waiting all along. One day, a girl brought a note folded into the shape of a bird. She stood on tiptoe and tucked it above the drawing of the cluster of chairs. It was made of soft, worn paper. Inside only one sentence. "No one told me I belonged here. I knew it when I stayed anyway." Someone circled it in yellow chalk. Someone else traced the wings. And underneath, in the smallest handwriting, a child wrote, "I didn't fly in, I walked." The wall didn't respond. It didn't need to. The light caught the edge of the paper and held it there, not like proof, but like permission. The spiral, the silence, the sentence. They all curved onward, making room for the next note, the next arrival, the next truth someone was brave enough to unfold. And just beneath it all, still gently taped to the bench, "You took space. We made more." The story, as always, waited patiently for the next name to write itself in. And the wall listened. To every whisper, every silence, every scribbled fragment passed from one hand to another. Over time, it became more than memory. It became momentum. Visitors no longer asked where to place their notes. They asked, where would it feel right? And always the answer came gently, just a glance upward, or a hand to the heart, or a quiet step toward a space that had been waiting all along. One day, a girl brought a note folded into the shape of a bird. She stood on tiptoe and tucked it above the drawing of the cluster of chairs. It was made of soft, worn paper. Inside, only one sentence. "No one told me I belonged here. I knew it when I stayed anyway." Someone circled it in yellow chalk. Someone else traced the wings. And underneath, in the smallest handwriting, a child wrote, "I didn't fly in. I walked." The wall didn't respond. It didn't need to. The light caught the edge of the paper and held it there. Not like proof, but like permission. The spiral, the silence, the sentence, they all curved onward, making room for the next note, the next arrival, the next truth. Someone was brave enough to unfold. And just beneath it all, still gently taped to the bench, "You took space. We made more." The story, as always, waited patiently for the next name to write itself in. The next morning, the dot remained, small, intentional, quiet as breath. Visitors paused in front of it more than anything else on the wall, not because it was colorful, not because it was bold, but because it was certain, a single mark of arrival, of someone who didn't need to explain how they got there, only that they had. By midday, someone had placed a drawing next to it, a circle made of overlapping handprints. Above it, a question in light pencil. How many people does it take to feel safe? That evening, responses began to appear like petals opening around it. 1, if they stay. 2, if they listen. 3, if one says, me too. All of us, eventually. By week's end, the dot had become a point of gravity, a place where kids crouched beside each other without needing to ask, where parents sat quietly while their children traced fingers over the spiral, and where teachers brought entire classes, not to talk about the wall, but to sit with it. A child who didn't speak wrote in blue marker beside the dot, "I didn't think a mark could be enough." Then I saw it was still here the next day. And someone else, without a name, added underneath, "We don't erase what's real." The wall wrapped that moment into itself, not as decoration, as direction. It bent a little wider, a little softer, to say again and again, "You arrived, you were brave, and we are still making room." A week later, the wall saw something new, something it hadn't seen in some time. A pause, not the kind that meant hesitation, the kind that meant reverence. That morning, a boy named Ellis arrived with his father. They stood side by side at the base of the wall. The father had come here once, many years ago, as a boy not much older than Ellis was now. He'd once written a sentence about a folded jacket and a bus stop, and how he thought kindness might feel like warmth. His sentence was still there, faint, faded, but real. Ellis found it, ran his fingers across the old ink, then looked up at his father. "You wrote that?" he asked. His father nodded. "I didn't know anyone would read it." Ellis stared at the words, then took a step back and opened his backpack. He pulled out a page, not wrinkled, not new, folded carefully. Inside was a drawing of a jacket draped across the back of a chair. Beneath it, in his own handwriting, "I found the sentence you left. I brought it something to rest on." They taped the drawing beside the old sentence. 2 generations, one line holding the other. As they stepped back, a volunteer wrote a note beneath both. "Some words live long enough to be answered." By afternoon, others had come, not to draw, not to write, but to find the sentences left before them, and quietly add their own. A reply to a note about hunger, a sketch beside a sentence about being the last one picked at school, a name signed under a sentence that had never had one before. The wall was not a monument. It was not a mirror. It was a table, wide and growing, where all were invited to place something small and say, "This is mine, and now it's part of us." And the wall did what it always did. It stayed. It listened. It made space. Again. The next addition came from a girl who had never written on a wall before. Her name was Tima. She was small for her age, her shoes too tight, and her voice so quiet it barely reached the edge of her scarf. She walked the room with careful steps, not touching anything, not stopping, until she reached the bench beneath the spiral where the sentence from Ellis was still fresh. She read it, twice, then took a folded scrap of paper from her pocket. The crease lines were worn like it had been opened and closed many times before she found the courage to carry it here. She opened it. On it was a single line. "I think I've been asking for a long time without knowing." Tima didn't say a word. She simply taped it beneath the spiral, right beside the drawing of the jacket. For a while, no one noticed. Then a boy sat beside it and stared for a long time. Finally, he added, "Some questions come out as silence." Another visitor, a teacher, added her own. And silence is still a sentence. By the end of the day, a circle of words had bloomed around Tima's note, like petals, like arms, like the slow unfolding of understanding. It wasn't loud. It wasn't bright. It was steady. That night, the last person to leave the hall found a small drawing resting on the edge of the bench, unsigned. It was a picture of a door, slightly open, with a voice bubble coming from the other side. Inside the bubble, "You knocked. We were already on our way." They taped it to the wall above Tima's sentence, and no one moved it, because even when the notes were quiet, they echoed. Even when the paper was thin, it held weight. Even when the words trembled, they stayed. In the following days, the circle around Tima's note became a place children gravitated toward, not because it was newest, but because it somehow felt familiar. A group of classmates came one morning with their teacher. They sat beneath the spiral, legs crossed, sketchbooks in laps. The teacher read some of the nearby sentences aloud, then gestured toward the growing ring of responses around Tima's. "I think I've been asking for a long time without knowing." The room stilled. Then one child, maybe 9, raised her hand and whispered, "What if I've never asked anything out loud?" The teacher smiled gently. "You don't have to say it to be heard." The girl nodded and began to draw. Her page showed a lighthouse, crooked and crayon bright. Around it, tiny waves. Underneath she wrote, "I never said help, but I left the light on." Her classmates leaned in, each adding a page of their own. One drew a field, one a single boot print. One boy, too shy to draw at all, handed in a blank sheet. "I think this is my asking," he said. The docent pinned each piece in a soft spiral around the others. And soon the circle, once just a ring of words, became a whole constellation. Each note, drawing, or silence, offering its own orbit around the gravity of that first small truth. "I think I've been asking for a long time without knowing." By dusk, a new sign had been added nearby. Simple, wood-framed. It read, "This is the place where questions without voices are still answered." No one knew who placed it, but no one questioned it, because the wall, as ever, had already made room. By the time the wall's circle of voices reached the far corner of the room, it had outgrown the word wall entirely. It no longer followed edges or stayed flat. It curved into corners, dipped around windowsills, and stretched onto ceilings like vines drawn by the weight of what had been left unsaid for too long. People didn't just visit anymore. They returned, some weekly, some yearly. Some brought children who hadn't yet spoken their first word, just to sit with them in the room where speaking wasn't the only way to be heard. One child named Miro came back every Friday after school. He didn't bring new drawings or long notes. He simply brought himself, sat in the same place, watched. Once he brought his little brother and said, "You don't have to draw, just be near it." His brother, 4 and fidgety, ran his hand along the bottom corner of the wall where a sentence had been written in tiny, looped handwriting. I asked quietly. The answer was loud anyway. Later that evening, the boy wrote his first note. "I think I'm ready for someone to hear me." And the wall did. The following week, another visitor, a teenager named Ivy, came with a torn notebook tucked under her arm. She had drawn pages and pages of things she never showed anyone. Not because they were secret, because she wasn't sure they were enough. She found a space near the drawing of the lighthouse and the field. Read the crayon lines, the ink, the pencil curves. She knelt and pressed her palm to a space of bare wall. Then she taped her own note. No drawing, just 4 words. "I'm here this time." A nearby volunteer saw her standing there, quiet, uncertain, and without saying anything, the volunteer reached into the pouch at her waist, pulled out a strip of blue chalk, and gently drew a circle around Ivy's note. Then underneath wrote, "So are we." Ivy didn't smile, not right away, but she sat down beneath it, stayed longer than she'd meant to, watched others walk by and glance at the chalk ring, and nod as if they'd just heard a secret only kindness could carry. Later that day, a parent walked into the room with their child, no more than 5. The child clutched a toy train in one hand and a folded drawing in the other. The parent looked nervous. "We weren't sure if she could add something. She doesn't write yet." The docent knelt. "She doesn't have to. The wall listens to drawings, to color, even to where people choose to sit." The child stepped forward slowly, unfolded her page. It was a drawing of a line of people standing in front of a house. Everyone had a small colored square on their chest, blue, red, yellow. One person was walking away, their square missing. She pointed at the person walking away, then at herself. The docent didn't ask what it meant. She just took the drawing, taped it gently beside Ivy's note, then labeled it, "For the one who thinks they've already been forgotten." That night, 3 people added drawings next to it. A chair with a jacket still hanging on the back, a window with no curtain, a map with no destination, only the words still written over it again and again. It was Ivy who returned the next morning and added a thread between them, a piece of yarn, soft, fixed with care. She didn't say why, but someone added a note below it. "This is the thread we leave behind so others can find their way back." More threads followed. Real ones, pencil lines, drawn bridges, curved arrows. A new shape began to form in the center of the spiral, not a final sentence, not an end, a nest, built of words, of lines, of people who had once asked, "Can I say this here?" and received not just permission, but a reply. One of the docents began calling it the quiet nest, and word spread. Soon, visitors came not just to write, but to rest. They'd sit beneath it, fold pages into cranes and leave them along the ledge, place their shoes just outside the chalk ring, sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for an hour, not talking, not writing, just being. A child once sat there with their eyes closed the entire time. When they opened them, they whispered to the docent nearby, "I didn't think quiet could answer back." The docent smiled. "It always has." The child smiled too, then picked up a pencil and wrote, "If you've been asking for a while, this space heard you first." The wall didn't shimmer. It didn't pulse. It simply continued. And in continuing, it reminded each person who passed through, you don't need the right words. You don't need to be first. You don't need to be ready. You just need to arrive. And the wall, the ever-growing, ever-softening, ever-brave wall, would do what it had done since the day a child first taped a note to glass and asked if anyone really meant it when they said they helped. It would answer, quietly, completely. Again. The day after the nest was named, a group of students from a nearby middle school came for their first visit. They were led by a teacher named Mr. Brennan, who'd been quietly folding their stories into his lessons all year, reading from anonymous notes, quoting snippets from the wall. Many of his students had never written anything they didn't have to. Some had never been to a museum. Most had never been asked what they wanted to say without being told what was allowed. The moment they stepped into the room, the hum of it changed. It was the kind of group that carried energy, noise, curiosity, and questions. Some of them asked out loud, "Are we supposed to be quiet? Can we touch the wall? Do people really write this stuff?" One boy, lanky and cautious, walked straight to the chalk spiral, read a note aloud that said, "I stood here for 20 minutes before I believed I belonged." And then, without looking at anyone, he murmured, "Same." His teacher heard it, didn't interrupt, just let him read. Another girl found the lighthouse drawing, the one someone had placed long ago, captioned with, "I never said help, but I left the light on." She stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "I drew this once, not this one, but this." She opened her bag, pulled out her own drawing, carefully folded and creased from a year of being carried and never shared. It was water-stained, quietly brilliant, a lighthouse too. But hers had no beam, just a soft pulse of color around it, like it had tried to be seen. She taped it beside the original, then wrote beneath it, "This one didn't light up, but I kept building it anyway. Someone in her class, watching nearby, added a pencil line connecting the two towers. Above it, they wrote, "It's okay if your light was off. Someone else was looking anyway." By noon, nearly every student had left something, a list of almosts. A drawing of two shadows sitting shoulder to shoulder, their arms not quite touching. A page that simply said, "Me not hiding." Mr. Brennan watched it all unfold with a softness in his chest he hadn't felt since he was a student himself. At the end of their visit, as the kids lingered and the volunteers gathered the last few drawings from the floor, he wrote his own note, taped it low on the wall near where younger students often sat. It said, "Some days I'm still afraid of being too much. Other days I wonder if I was ever enough. But here I remember, trying is already both." That note remained untouched for 3 weeks. Then, one quiet afternoon, a child added to it, "I sat here today. You were right." In the months that followed, the nest grew into something more, a kind of living invitation. Visitors began bringing not just words and drawings, but objects. Small ones, careful ones, a rock smoothed by worry, a string tied like a loop, a button sewn with thread that didn't match. Nothing expensive, nothing loud, but everything full of story. The docents didn't catalog these offerings. They didn't label them or seal them in glass. They left them where they were, on ledges, on cushions, on the empty chair someone once said was never really empty. A child named Rue brought a small pouch. Inside it just one thing, a broken key. When asked why, she shrugged and said, "I tried to get in with it for a long time. It never worked. But now I don't need it." She placed it gently near the wall and added this, "Some doors don't open, but someone will build a room without one." Beside her, a volunteer added a drawing, a hallway, no doors, just warm light at the end, and under it, 4 words, "We knew you'd come." The wall had become more than paper and ink. It was now memory made visible, a map of returning, a chorus of small moments that no longer needed to shout to be remembered. And on a cold morning, when the rain tapped gently against the windows, the docents opened the room early. A boy was already waiting, soaked hoodie, quiet eyes, empty hands. He stepped inside, read no notes, touched no wall. He sat in the corner, then whispered to no one, "I just needed to be inside something that didn't want to leave." No one asked his name. No one asked what he meant. They only pinned a blank page on the wall above where he sat, and wrote, "For whoever needed this too." By day's end, 4 more notes had joined it. By week's end, a dozen. No one filled the page, but no one let it go unnoticed. Because the wall, like the people who visited it, was never waiting to be finished. Only to begin again, with someone new, someone small, someone ready, or someone simply tired, who looked up and saw that nothing was final, and everything still said, "Come in, you're right on time." The wall had learned to wait. It didn't call out. It didn't shimmer with attention. But those who needed it always seemed to find their way to it, without map, without appointment. It had become, over time, a compass for the unseen, a sanctuary of scrawled hopes, quiet reckonings, and sentences left behind like breadcrumbs. One day a woman named Johnny stepped through the entrance quietly. She was in her 40s, a social worker, a mother, the kind of person who always asked how others were doing before ever admitting how tired she had become. She had never written on the wall, had brought hundreds of people to it, children, teens, adults, guided them gently to its edges, let them place their words. But her own? Still folded, still silent, still carefully buried inside her coat pocket. Until this day, the room was mostly empty, just a few visitors tracing the spiral, a child asleep on the cushion beside the quiet nest. Johnny sat on the floor near the base of the wall, pulled out the page, opened it slowly. It was creased, ink-smudged. The writing was neat, practiced, restrained, and at the top, just one line. "I've been listening for so long, I forgot how to say anything." She pinned it low near the feet of the spiral, almost as if hoping the sentence would go unnoticed. But it didn't. An hour later, a teenager crouched down to read it. She sat beside it for a long time, didn't speak. Then, in a different pen, beneath Johnny's line, she added, "You did just now?" and walked away. That was the first thread. By evening, 3 more hands had reached for pens and added to the chain. "You haven't forgotten. You've just been holding space. We saw you in every answer you made room for. Now we're holding space for you." Johnny returned the next morning, found the notes, touched the wall lightly as if it might breathe back, and wept. For the first time in years, she sat for hours, not in service of someone else, not as a guide, just as a person, a visitor, a voice finally making its way back through the hush. Later that week, someone added a small frame beside her note. Inside it, a key, simple, brass, no label, just a tag with a piece of twine that read, "You unlocked more than you knew." Johnny never said whether she left it. She didn't need to. The wall, as always, knew how to witness without needing credit. That's what made it sacred. Not the signatures, the staying, not the perfect sentence, the permission to try again. One child, visiting later that season, left a note beneath the framed key. It was shaped like a leaf torn from a notebook, written in highlighter. "She made the space where I started to breathe." The next day, that note had a circle around it, a new edition, penned by someone who'd only written one other sentence in their life. Then she built oxygen. And somehow that word, oxygen, echoed through the room. Not in volume, in memory. People began adding small blue dots around their drawings, tiny marks like droplets, like breath. A new tradition took root. For every person who felt too tired to begin, someone else placed a blue dot next to their note. A silent promise. You don't have to hold it alone. You don't have to go first. Someone already exhaled here before you. Johnny returned once more a year later. She wore a pin now, an enamel circle, light blue, gifted by a girl who'd once sat trembling beside her. She found her note again. It had grown roots now, threads, drawings, footprints, letters, hearts. She stood before it for a long time, then added just 4 words. Simple. True. Enough. I hear myself again. That afternoon, a child standing across the room whispered to a docent, "How did that sentence make the room feel warmer?" The docent smiled, pointed to the wall, and said, "Because it reminded us that even silence can be a kind of courage, and every whisper, when heard, becomes a flame." And the wall flickered, not in light, but in knowing, in yes, in again, and in the slow, unstoppable return of voices that once sat in the wings, but finally knew the middle of the room was always meant for them. In the quiet days that followed, the room entered another kind of season, not defined by weather or holidays, but by rhythm. The wall, always evolving, had now become less of a fixture and more of a heartbeat, a cadence. It responded not just to the words pinned to it, but to the weight with which they were written. This season became known among the docents as the quiet swell. It happened once or twice a year, never predicted, never announced. It was marked by a rising number of pauses, fewer drawings, fewer words, but deeper ones. You could feel it in the silence, like breath being held collectively, like everyone had reached the same deep place at the same time. One morning during a quiet swell, a girl named Elia entered the room with a coat 3 sizes too big and eyes too old for her age. She had visited before, twice, maybe 3 times, always alone, always silent. But this time she brought something, not a drawing, not a note, a spoon, bent, scuffed, wrapped in a piece of cloth. She walked up to the wall, found a low corner where the spiral had never quite reached, and placed the spoon gently on the floor. Then she folded the cloth and sat beside it. She didn't explain, Didn't label it, didn't look for approval. She stayed there still for almost an hour, just watching it, just being near it. When she finally stood, she didn't walk away. She whispered, "This was the last thing we had from the kitchen," and left. That night, no one moved the spoon. The docents didn't ask. They added only one thing beside it, a folded card that read, "For what we carried when we thought no one would ever ask." The next morning, 3 more objects appeared around the spoon: a single sock with stitched initials, a coin wrapped in string, a paper tag from a travel bag. None were signed. All were placed with the same care, the same silence, the same reverence for the things that held memory long after comfort was gone. By the end of the week, the spoon had a circle of belongings around it. Someone called it the hearth, not because it burned, but because it gathered. A volunteer pinned a note nearby. "This is where we keep proof that we survived the part no one saw." From then on, the hearth remained. Visitors didn't always add to it, but they always sat near it a while, touched the air above the spoon, the sock, the thread. Some left with nothing spoken. Some left with something returned. One boy wrote, "I don't remember everything that happened, but this room lets me remember how I lived through it." Another girl added, "I sat near the spoon, and suddenly I didn't feel like I had to explain why I was tired." The docents began leaving small cushions around the hearth. Not too many, just enough. No one rushed. No one instructed. The wall didn't need more noise to grow. It needed presence. Elia came back one day weeks later, saw the circle, saw the added items, read the notes. She sat where she'd sat before. Didn't say much, but when she stood, she added something new, a sentence written on a napkin. Pinned to the cloth she'd first wrapped the spoon in, it said, "I thought I was leaving something behind. Turns out I was making a beginning." That napkin stayed, the spoon stayed. The quiet swell began to recede. Words returned slowly. Sentences curled around the hearth. The wall widened, not in structure, but in trust, in the knowledge that it could now hold not just voices, but silence shaped by grief, by memory, by what we packed when we didn't know if we'd get to come back. A sentence appeared in the corner of the wall the following day, written in a child's messy scrawl. "We bring small things, but they mean we're still carrying ourselves." And someone, unknown, unseen, wrote underneath in gentle print, "And we're still carrying you, too." The room, warmed by those words, folded them in like breath. The quiet swell softened, but it did not vanish. It simply became part of the wall's rhythm. Another verse in its song, a hum beneath the drawings, a pulse in the spiral, waiting always to hold what someone might carry next, and whisper always, "You are not alone here, not with this, not with that spoon, not with the space you dared to fill. You are not alone here, not anymore." As the room exhaled from the quiet swell, a kind of clarity settled over the space. Not a conclusion, never that. More like a shared breath after long silence. Visitors began to return with something different in their hands, not just stories or sadness, but acknowledgments. Thank you notes to strangers they had never met, letters to their past selves, drawings of what healing looked like, not perfect, but in progress. One morning, a teenager named Cale entered, holding a weathered paperback book under one arm and a blank postcard in his hand. He had been to the wall before, as a child, then again as a quiet observer in middle school. Now, taller, older, still quiet but steadier, he returned with intention. He approached the hearth, sat near the spoon, opened his book not to read but to use as a surface. On the postcard he wrote, "I used to visit this place thinking it would help me leave something behind. Now I know it helped me carry something forward." He signed it with no name, taped it beside Aaliyah's napkin, and placed his paperback gently on the floor. Inside the front cover was a note, for someone who needs a story to hold while theirs is still forming. By the end of the week, 4 books joined his. Not a library, not a shelf, just a pile near the hearth, each with a note inside. This helped. I read this when it hurt. Page 47 is where I remembered something good. Chapter 3 made me believe I could grow again. Someone left a pen and a blank bookmark in every copy. A quiet invitation. Leave a line behind. Someone might find it right when they need it. Within a month, the books had notes tucked into margins, soft underlinings, smudged fingerprints. One day, a little girl opened the first paperback, flipped to the middle, and found a line circled twice. She did not know the end, but she knew how to stand. Under it, someone had added, "So I stood too." The girl looked up at the docent nearby and said, "Can I write to her?" "To the person who left the note?" "No," the girl said, "to the girl who stood." The docent handed her a card. She wrote, "I haven't stood yet, but now I know what it looks like when I do." They added it to the wall, pinned it beside the thread of answers that had begun growing beneath Cale's postcard. That cluster came to be called the Echo Shelf. Not a shelf in the traditional sense, but a soft stacking of wisdom left in layers. Not instructions, not advice, just offerings. Across the room, someone added a small sign beside the guest book. You don't need to be certain to leave something beautiful. And people did. A feather, a torn concert ticket, a recipe from a grandmother who made soup every time someone came home crying. A ring made of yarn, a Polaroid with the words, "Here's proof of one good day." And then one afternoon, just as the light shifted to gold through the high windows, a child walked in with nothing in her hands, only a phrase she carried in her mouth, whispering it again and again. She approached the hearth, sat, and finally spoke. "Am I late?" No one said anything. They just opened a space, handed her a piece of paper, and let her write. She didn't write much, just this. "You waited for me." She placed it gently on the floor, not pinned, not labeled, just present. The next morning it had a circle drawn around it, then a second, then a spiral of responses growing outward. "Of course we did. You were already part of this. We didn't know your name, but we knew you'd come." And under it all, one note, signed with a single star. "You're not late. You're the reason we stayed this long." The docent on duty folded her hands in her lap, eyes misty. She whispered to herself, "So this is what it means to arrive after silence." And the wall, never needing to reply aloud, held that truth gently, just as it always had. Not in answers, in welcome, in the soft knowledge that some people aren't late. They're right on time for what only they could write. That week, the phrase, "right on time," began to appear all across the wall. Not because anyone announced it, not because it trended online. It simply began, as if one person's quiet line had created an invisible path for others to follow. A girl with a pink scarf scrawled it next to her drawing of a cracked sidewalk filled with moss. She'd captioned the image, "It grew there because no one swept it away." Then, beneath that, "right on time," a boy wrote it in silver ink at the bottom of a note left in the Echo Shelf. "I was scared. I'm still scared. But I said something. Right on time." Someone added it in block letters across a map they had pinned to the wall. A map with no roads, only small marks like constellations, each one labeled, "This is where I got up. This is where I was seen. This is where I stayed." And beneath the final star, traced in black pen, "right on time." Even the docents noticed the shift, not in numbers, but in posture. Visitors stood a little straighter, lingering just a bit longer, reading more slowly, as if that single phrase had lifted something heavy off the edges of the wall, reminding everyone that arrival is not measured in speed or age or eloquence, just in presence, just in bravery, just in showing up. And on the last day of that quiet week, a child came forward and left a sentence that would stay for years. I almost didn't come today, but then I remembered. Late and brave are the same thing here. It was pinned beside the very first note from Sam, the one that had started it all. Still taped, still crinkled, still legible, and somehow still louder than ever. Please don't call security. I just wanted to ask if you ever mean it when you say you help people. Below that, someone added a final message in delicate handwriting. You didn't knock on the door late. You taught us how to build new ones. And the wall breathed again, not because something ended, but because someone, again, had begun. That evening, the room stayed open late, not because anyone scheduled it, because no one wanted to leave. There was a kind of glow in the space, not from lights, but from presence. A warmth built by repetition, by hands reaching forward, by footsteps soft against the floor, by the soft rustle of paper being pinned beside stories that came before. A group of teenagers sat in a circle near the center of the spiral. None of them had spoken when they entered. They carried no signs, no drawings, only each other. The wall greeted them the way it greeted everyone, without urgency, without judgment. They read for almost an hour. Not all of them added something, but each found something. One girl, after reading a drawing of a girl carrying a house on her back with the caption, "I brought home with me because I was scared to leave it behind," stood up and reached into her sleeve. She pulled out a photograph. Just a door, painted green, slightly crooked on its hinges. She taped it to the wall, wrote beside it, "This was the last thing I touched before I left. I didn't know I'd miss it." No one responded aloud, but beneath her note another teen scribbled, "It's here now. You brought it." That was the rule here, though it had never been spoken. If you carried it in silence, the wall would speak back. One boy had sat silently all afternoon, knees drawn to his chest, head low. When his friends left, he stayed behind. Then he walked, slowly with intention, to the furthest edge of the spiral, where the paper was thinnest, where the air held the hush of beginnings. He taped up a page, no image, just this. "This is the first thing I've said that no one had to ask me for." A note appeared beside it an hour later. That's the kind we wait for the most. The next morning an older woman arrived. She didn't wear shoes. She didn't carry anything in her hands. But in her eyes were whole decades of trying. She walked the wall in silence. Then, at the base of the original note, the one left by Sam, whose story had spread to classrooms, articles, books, she sat. And from her coat, she pulled a letter. Not written in English. She didn't translate it. She didn't need to. She placed it on the bench with a rock to hold it down. And underneath wrote in shaky script, "Not everyone needs to understand, but everyone deserves to be included." It stayed there, the letter, the rock, the weight of what had been spoken for those who spoke differently. And throughout the day, more messages joined it in other languages. Arabic, Tagalog, Hebrew, ASL drawings traced in pencil. No captions, just faith that someone, someday, would read it, and if not read it, feel it, and if not feel it, leave space anyway. By sunset, a child came running in with a note half finished, out of breath. She found a spot near the center, taped it up, backed away. It said, "I didn't get to finish this, but I didn't want to miss the chance." Someone walked up behind her, not a volunteer, another visitor. They smiled gently and handed her a pencil. "You're not out of time," they said. "This wall doesn't close." And together they finished it. The rest of the note read, "I thought I had to be done before I could be seen. Now I know. Being seen helps me finish." That became the quote printed on the visitor cards for the rest of the year. Printed below it, a line in fine print. "No story starts perfect. We're just grateful it starts at all." And so it did, again and again. The following weekend, the wall reached what the docents quietly began calling the bend. It wasn't a milestone marked by any formal announcement. No ceremony, no ribbon. But everyone could feel it. The spiral of stories that had once spread like a ripple now turned back in on itself, curling toward the place it had started, toward the very first note. Toward Sam. The original paper, still soft and weathered, had never been moved, never laminated. Its tape had been gently replaced year after year, but the folds remained, the handwriting remained. The raw, honest ache of the question still hovered in the air beside it. Please don't call security. I just wanted to ask if you ever mean it when you say you help people. Now, as the spiral returned to this note, something shifted. People didn't just write beside it. They sat. They leaned against the wall in quiet reflection. One child lay down beside it and whispered, "I think she asked for all of us." And so a new tradition began. Every visitor who chose to leave a note near the bend added a line not about themselves, but about someone they once saw trying. One child wrote, "My brother stopped writing when no one looked. I'm writing this for him." A grandmother added, "My daughter taught herself to listen when the world was too loud for her. She was a wall before I knew how to read one." Another, "I saw a girl give her seat to someone smaller and then stand for 3 hours. That was the first time I saw help with a spine." These weren't requests. They were tributes. And in response, others left small tokens, threaded beads, feathers, a tiny snow globe, 2 worn-out bus passes paper-clipped together. They called it the witness nest, not for the things inside it, but for the stories it held of those who might never come to the wall themselves, but had changed someone who did. One teen, eyes full of tears, placed a photograph of a pair of shoes, scuffed and taped at the heel. Beneath it she wrote, "These are the shoes I got from my neighbor when we were evicted. I didn't say thank you right. I hope she'd like knowing they helped me walk here." That photo stayed in a frame beside the first note. The docents placed a blank notebook beneath it, labeled, "For the people we remember when we remember how to be brave." And people filled it, quickly, quietly. One entry read, "The woman on the train who let me cry without asking what was wrong." Another, "The janitor who replaced my broken zipper without telling anyone." Another, "The person who said, 'You can sit with me,' before they even knew my name." A child drew a stick figure handing another a balloon. No words, just the drawing. Someone wrote beneath it, "The first time I floated." And so the wall, long thought to be a spiral of singular voices, revealed itself as something else entirely. A chorus. Not a choir in unison, but a layered harmony, people helping people find their pitch, not by leading, but by making room. One docent remarked, while pinning another tribute, "We thought this wall was about what we needed to say. Maybe it's also about who taught us to speak." And from that day on, the Bend became both a beginning and a return, a place where bravery circled back to gratitude, where visibility made space for legacy, and where Sam's note, creased, quiet, still asking, remained, as ever, the heartbeat. Not just of the wall, but of the people it welcomed, again and always.